Now? I want some friggin' answers!
Okay, Hurley, I'll take it from here. Time to explain those damn numbers. Welcome to the Lost Explained episode guide, where we will be exploring and explaining the TV show Lost, episode by episode, mystery by mystery. This channel spoils the entire show, so only watch if you already know the secrets of the island. Please like, share and subscribe to keep this channel alive, as I can only keep doing this with your continued support, and I'd appreciate it if you shared the channel far and wide with other fans wherever you may find them. Numbers is the 18th episode of Season 1, and it is the first Hurley-centric storyline of the whole show, in which the group comic relief goes from lovable slacker to cursed lottery winner. We will see how his lucky numbers bring him both fortune and a string of bizarre disasters that lead him to Australia on a quest for answers. This quest picks up for him once again on the island, as he finds another connection to the numbers via the enigmatic Frenchwoman. Numbers is part adventure, part mythology bombshell, and perhaps more significantly, the moment when Hurley officially becomes the linchpin at the centre of one of Lost's biggest mysteries. So, was Hurley really cursed, or was he actually, as Jacob later puts it, blessed? Let's find out. I've already gone on record as to how I find Season 1 Hurley to be relatively one-dimensional up to this point. Jorge Garcia had so much more to give as an actor, but the writers' room seemed to really struggle to find a purpose for him outside of being this good-natured source of levity to balance out the heavier dramatic elements. If a scene required some humour, or if the mood needed to be lightened, then the writers would roll him out for it. Everybody loves Hugo. He's the one who builds a golf course to bring joy to the survivors, who offers friendship to outcasts, including troublemakers like Sawyer and Jin, or untrustworthy new additions like Juliet, and later even arch-villains like Ben. He was also intended to be the audience surrogate, who could say the things we were all thinking and feeling, and his everyman bemusement at all the crazy things going on around him always cut through the show's heavy mythological madness with self-aware commentary and incredulity. However, this also prevented him from growing as a character. He was trapped being that guy. Think about it. What have we really learned about Hurley over the past 17 episodes? Not a hell of a lot. The reason for that is because, behind the scenes, the writers didn't know either. They have confessed that they struggled to figure out his backstory. Early ideas thrown around and toyed with included making him a friendly neighbourhood repo man.
This doesn't make any sense. It's not you. Dude, you don't know me.
In the series format document, the original planned reason for why Hurley was in Sydney was going to be related to a repossession of a former millionaire's yacht, and I believe somewhere in that backstory lied the germ of the idea that would eventually become Hurley's actual backstory, an unlucky millionaire. Even though he is still largely treated as a comical character for the rest of Season 1, Numbers is the first time we see him deal with his own problems and dilemmas, as he struggles with forces on an almost cosmic scale that seem impossible to solve. Although it would be nearly a full season more before Hurley was given a major and purely dramatic storyline.
I'm sorry I forgot the blankets.
I think I've said this in the guide somewhere already, but the more Hurley suffers in the show, the more interesting his character becomes. Hurley really goes through a transformation, as does Jorge Garcia as an actor. Numbers gives him his first real opportunity to expand his range beyond the humour. The on-island story focuses on his one-man mission to find Rousseau after he discovers that she too seems obsessed by the very same numbers that ruined his life. Saeed wakes up to see Hurley watching him sleep, which always makes me laugh, and Hurley proceeds to interrogate the interrogator for more info. He is soon marching off on his own to track down the elusive and quite dangerous Frenchwoman. He finds and follows that mysterious cable that we discussed in the episode guide for Solitary, and it then becomes a race to catch up as Jack, Saeed and Charlie head off after him in hot pursuit. This one is really a lot of fun. It's one of those side quest episodes that is actually worth taking the time out of other bigger issues to go on. Yes, the raft is still being built, and yes, there are still a lot of unresolved mysteries to address, but after several episodes in a row that were pretty heavy on the gloom and doom, it's really nice to follow Hurley on a wild goose chase for a change. The growing friendship between Hurley and Charlie also gets a proper spotlight. Usually they get one or two throwaway scenes, but it's in the background of someone else's episode. Charlie is obviously pissed off at Hurley for going off half-cocked, and berates him several times throughout the episode, quite reasonably.
Hurley, will you shut up and listen to Jack? He said stay put. You're acting like a bloody lunatic.
And I think this is where I began to become invested in their friendship more, and I marvel now at how their numerous interactions as the oceanic equivalent of Laurel and Hardy would one day lead to a heartbreaking goodbye scene and a bond that endures into the next life. I think Hurley is the brother that Charlie truly deserved. One of my favourite moments between them actually happens in this episode.
About a year ago? Someone shooting at
I should also acknowledge how Jorge is an expert at the comedy fall. He has multiple falls throughout the show, and they are always fabulous feats of physical comedy. Of course, Hurley finds that even when he has a true friend to confide his secrets in, he's still not believed. Charlie's baffled reaction to his claims of winning the jackpot and being cursed is played off for laughs, though it speaks to something that will become an ongoing issue for Hugo as his storylines evolved. Every time he tries to open up, he is met with incredulity.
So, what, that's it? That's all? What do you want me to say?
How about you believe me, man?
Hurley, they're numbers.
And he will struggle with his mental health as a result, which finds him questioning his sanity altogether come Season 2's episode Dave. You see, unlike Locke, he actually questions his perceptions of reality, which goes all the way back to that line that Locke rolls out to Jack in White Rabbit.
I think I'm going crazy.
Well, you're not going crazy.
No?
No, crazy people don't know they're going crazy. They think they're getting saner.
Now, the centrepiece scene of this episode comes when Hurley finally runs into Rousseau. Unfortunately, this is the big disappointment of the episode for me, because I don't like this scene at all. After all of the build-up to it, which has been really fun, it simply doesn't deliver the goods, dramatically speaking. Firstly, it's another hand wave in terms of dealing with a mystery, in order to kick that can further down the mythology road. Basically, Rousseau has no idea what the numbers mean, despite writing them down over and over. They were simply part of the broadcast that brought her and her team to the island. And while this absolutely does shed more light on her backstory, it doesn't actually shed any further light on the nature of the numbers. And this will become a big problem by the end of the series, because the numbers will be kept nebulous as a concept, and many people come away from the show feeling like they were never adequately explained. I do believe that the show actually gave us the tools to understand what they intended with this numerological concept, but more on that in the Jungle of Mystery section. The other aspect of this scene that I find frustrating is Hurley's outburst at Rousseau. Not because it isn't warranted. Like I said, he is the audience surrogate here, and like us, he wants some answers for a change. It's more the fact that his petulant frustration is enough to bring down the carefully constructed walls around Rousseau.
Now? I want some friggin' answers!
It feels totally out of character for her to be moved by such an outburst. I know that both of these characters share something in common, not just the numbers, but the whole sense of being deemed crazy by other people. However, Rousseau doesn't know that about Hurley. She was trying to blow this guy's head off 2 seconds ago, so I just find their interaction here to be rather underwhelming and forced, and it briefly robs Rousseau of her mystique and stoicism. This is what happens when you put together a comic relief character who lacks dramatic substance, with a totally humourless dramatic character who is supposed to be as ruthless as she is traumatised. It's like oil and water. There is a reason why we don't get any more scenes like this between these two later in the series. Rousseau quietly admits that the numbers brought her life to ruin as well, which suggests that Hurley's curse might not be superstition at all, and he's relieved for someone to basically tell him that he isn't crazy. This will continue to be the backbone through much of Hurley's arc for the next several seasons. Now, while Hurley is chasing the numbers, the episode gracefully delivers one of the more tender moments of the season, as John Locke crafts a cradle for Claire's soon-to-be-born baby. At a time when Claire is struggling with memory loss and alienation, Locke's gesture is a really selfless fatherly act that contrasts beautifully with his usual intensity and obsession with the island's secrets.
It's a cradle.
Happy birthday, Claire.
Thank you.
This moment between them shows Locke's softer side, highlighting his ability to connect with people on a deeply human level. The scene feels like a quiet breath of fresh air in the middle of Hurley's madcap misadventure, and it forms the foundation of John and Claire's relationship going into the future. A relationship that will be cleverly subverted by the time the Man in Black is wearing John's face in season 6, whilst continuing on that father-daughter dynamic with Claire. The off-island flashback narrative reveals Hurley's life before the crash, including his unexpected lottery win using the cursed sequence of numbers, and a chronicle of how his fortune quickly turns sour. We are introduced to his mother Carmen, who shall become a rather delightful recurring guest star, and we also see Hurley in his Mr. Cluck's uniform, which will again recur throughout the series in various forms. The misfortunes start to pile up. His new house burns down, his grandfather suddenly dies, he's mistaken for a drug lord, which was an in-joke reference to why Jorge was cast in the role following his appearance on Curb Your Enthusiasm as Larry David's drug dealer, and just generally awful fates befalling people wherever he goes.
The numbers are cursed. You know there is no such thing as a...
Quick side note here, the man falling out the window behind Hugo's accountant is not John Locke, as some people often mistake it to be. First of all, this moment is played for comedic effect, which would make cruel lightness of the events in The Man from Tallahassee. Furthermore, this building is an office block where high-powered attorneys and accountants roam, while the second building that Locke falls from is a residential complex, where rich conmen live. It's also worth noting the timeline difference. Locke is in a wheelchair for 4 years, which means he was pushed out of the window in approximately the year 2000. Oof, hell of a start to the 21st century. Poor John. Whereas Hurley says he won the lottery a year ago in 2003. That said, there is a reference to Locke in this scene.
You are now the majority shareholder for a box company in Tustin.
This is the very same box company that Locke was working for before the crash, and this explains why Randy went from being a manager of a Mr. Cluck's to that box company. Hurley is such a good guy, he even gives jobs to people who were once horrible to him.
Wait, is that a problem, Reyes?
We'll see this connection revisited once again in the Sideways in season 6. So, as a consequence of all these bizarre accidents, Hurley becomes absolutely convinced that the numbers themselves are cursed, and this leads him back to Santa Rosa, where we learn he was once institutionalised there. And this is where we meet Leonard Sims, who has been repeating the numbers sequence over and over again for years.
4, 8, 50, 60, 22, 42, 4, 8, 50, 60, 22.
It turns out that Hurley got the numbers from Leonard, who by all accounts was driven mad by them, and Leonard first heard them from Sam Toomey, who he was stationed with at a listening post. What's cool is that we will later find out the origin of that broadcast. And this is why Hurley was in Sydney, to talk to Sam Toomey. Instead, he gets Toomey's widow Martha, who is absolutely infamous as having one of the most diabolical Australian accents in the show.
You're talking about the numbers.
Yes.
We see how Hurley tries to trace back the origin of the numbers to their source, only to find out that no one actually knows where they came from. But due to the way Sam Toomey and Leonard Sims's lives ended up, it reaffirms his belief that the numbers are cursed. The fact that he ended up on a plane that crashed on the way back home only further solidifies his paranoia. I really love this episode. It's pitched at exactly the right level that it needs to be. It's funny without becoming full-on farce, which is something Hurley episodes often veer a little too close to for my liking. And it is uncommonly weird in all the ways that the show will become known for as the tropes develop beyond the basics of year one. But it isn't completely irreverent and throwaway, because it also has some decent stakes to the adventure as Team Hurley dodge death several times, while mythological intrigue increases even further. Essentially, the quirk and comedy don't undermine the drama, and the tonal balance is pretty much pitch perfect. For me, future Hurley episodes will be hit and miss when attempting to strike this same balance. The actor who develops the most over the course of the series is without a doubt Jorge, who starts off as one of the lesser players, but by the end has become a truly accomplished performer. The episode ends with Hurley still grappling with the weight of fate, luck, and the mysterious forces that seem to govern the island. But for us, knowing where the story goes, we are now better placed to unpack and explain those mysterious forces in detail, and we're going to do it right now. What do the numbers mean? Towards the end of Lost, showrunner Damon Lindelof found himself being confronted by long-held fan questions, particularly on the issue of these damn numbers. This is what he had to say about them in an interview with E! Online in 2009. I feel like you have to be very careful about entering into midi-chlorian territory. I grew up on Star Wars, I've seen the Star Wars movies hundreds of times, I can recite them chapter and verse, and never once did anyone ever say to me, or did it occur to me to say, what is the Force exactly? Can you explain that for me better than Alec Guinness does? Look, this answer pissed off a lot of fans at the time, but I actually understand what he was driving at, despite the fact that it seemed quite dismissive. The numbers are conceptual, they get talked about a lot and represent something all-encompassing and fundamental to the rules of this fictional universe, yet at the same time remain pretty abstract. Many of us would have been happy with a whole episode dedicated entirely to Jacob sitting down with Hurley to explain the numbers in detail, preferably using a chalkboard and visual aids, whereas other people watching the show would have tuned out entirely from such an episode, which is something we actually saw happen in those last couple of mythology-heavy seasons, especially for those who didn't overly care about the weirder stuff. Or, as Damon Lindelof more eloquently put it, we have to make the show for the hardcore fans who care about the numbers, but we also have to make it for my mum, who just wants Sawyer to take his shirt off. In the same interview, Damon points to supplemental materials that they released during seasons 2 and 3, which helped fill in some of the background. This was a global transmedia ARG called The Lost Experience, that let fans play inside the show's universe. It incorporated websites, chiefly the Hanso Foundation, fake TV commercials, phone numbers, podcasts, shout out to DJ Dan, real-world clues on billboards and candy bars, and in-universe fictional bloggers like Rachel Blake. All of this was in service of unspooling backstory that was too dense to feature in the actual series. The ARG ultimately led players to uncover the secret behind the numbers and how they were the core constants of the Valenzetti equation, a formula that predicted humanity's extinction. In a nutshell, the Hanso Foundation hired this guy Valenzetti to work on this equation in order to determine what the probability was of the world ending in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Valenzetti deduced that human cataclysm would occur within the next 30 years, and so the Dharma Initiative was born in an attempt to change those constants and save the world. Now, Damon personally considers the Valenzetti equation canon to the show, although there is still ongoing debate about how much these supplemental materials can count towards explaining things that the show itself chose not to explain within its own narrative. But perhaps that's a conversation for another day. Many viewers would later figure out that the Swan Hatch countdown timer that resets to 108 minutes was actually the sum total of all the numbers added up together, making this equation a quite literal pressure valve keeping Doomsday at bay. Yet the numbers go even deeper than what was divulged in the Lost Experience, because they indicate that there are grander forces at work in guiding the chain of events that we see play out in the narrative. Much later in Season 6, the numbers come to be represented by people on Jacob's list of candidates. It is no coincidence that these candidates would also become the human equivalent of a pressure valve, keeping Doomsday at bay. And that's not to mention the various appearances of this sequence throughout the series, either collectively or individually. Fans reinterpreted the episode numbers as the first breadcrumb towards this cosmology, an argument that destiny had always been numerically encoded into our reality. I think the most illuminating thing that Damon Lindelof ever said about this mystery was that the numbers were around long before the early 60s. So what exactly did he mean by this, and what exactly do the numbers mean in the larger picture of the show's mythology? Well, the source at the heart of the island is no ordinary energy. It pulses out into the world, leaving behind a powerful numerical fingerprint woven into the fabric of reality itself. The island's influence has shaped events across time and space. Every uncanny coincidence, every life-changing twist of fate, every mysterious connection between people. It was all part of a greater design. The numbers appear again and again, echoing the island's reach, this cryptic signal reminding us that nothing is random and everything happens for a reason, and that there is an architecture to our existence being manipulated by some unseen prime mover. As I described them in my video on science and time travel, they are the science that help to explain faith. We later see the numbers embodied by Jacob's surviving candidates in Season 6. This cements the idea that it was by design these 6 would be the last remaining agents of change in the endgame. You could say these people are the island's numerical constants. We could also argue that the equation does allow for variables within its architecture, and perhaps a good example of this is Kate. She was not one of the relevant numbered candidates in that sequence, instead designated as number 51 and crossed off the wall, yet she is the one who ultimately vanquishes the Man in Black by saving him a bullet. The Man in Black made a classic Daniel Faraday mistake. He was too busy keeping his eye on the constants that he forgot about the variables, just as Jacob had surely hoped. The main point I'm trying to make here is that the numbers have always been around. They weren't invented in the 60s by Valenzetti, they were discovered. Jacob didn't intentionally choose these numbers for his candidates. The candidates were fated to be connected to those numbers. And I explain this in more depth in my video on the game, where I go inside the lighthouse and explain the mechanics of what is actually happening inside there. So it's helpful to view the numbers in the same way that we see mathematicians decode the building blocks of the universe. Nature is full of mathematical patterns, and not just with numbers, but abstractions too. Take the Fibonacci sequence as the closest example. The golden ratio is derived from that sequence, and many things in nature adhere to that ratio. The numbers in Lost are simply the numbers that decode the island's influence on our world. It might have been more cohesive had the writers found a way to spell this out within the narrative itself and provide us with that midi-chlorian scene that Lindelof hated so much, but the story was never really about explaining the mechanics of the island and fate in this kind of detail. While it is conceptually fascinating, it only works dramatically in pieces rather than as a whole, as clues and Easter eggs that allude to something bigger. Besides, if they'd explained them in detail on the show, we would have been robbed of having these very discussions that we're having to this day. I mean, this channel only exists because the show gave us just enough without giving us everything. Why was the radio tower broadcasting the numbers? The Dharma Initiative's on-island team originally constructed the radio tower and programmed it to broadcast the numbers as a signal to their off-island counterparts. This broadcast served as a status update, indicating that the formula predicting humanity's extinction remained unchanged. The idea was that if a successful intervention ever actually altered the equation, then the numbers could be updated or the broadcast would stop entirely. It's worth noting that this method of using a repeating numerical transmission mirrors the concept of real-world numbers stations, which have long been associated with coded communications in espionage. Anyway, this broadcast is the very same broadcast that Russo's team would pick up on their radios in 1988, that would draw them to the island and to their doom. And we can also deduce that the Dharma radio tower broadcast is the same one that Sam Toomey and Leonard Sims picked up on whilst monitoring long-wave radio transmissions at that government listening post, which also led them to their own respective fates. Here's a cool bit of extra trivia for you Losties that are not aware of this fact, but Jorge Garcia used to host a Lost podcast called Geronimo Jack's Beard, in which he and his co-host Bethany would talk about the show and his experiences working on it. In one of the last podcasts they recorded, Jorge revealed that during Season 5, he actually recorded the numbers broadcast heard from the radio tower. Now, he speculated that this might have been a hint from the writers that Hurley, while living in the Dharma Initiative era, was possibly meant to be the one who originally set the broadcast in motion. Another intended causality loop that it seems the writers never got the chance to pull the trigger on. Hello. Somewhere in my Season 1 episode guide is a hidden video. The only way to find it is to look for this symbol. Once you see the symbol, you shall find the link. Now, this is a beta test to see how many people are interested in me doing future Easter egg hunts like this. If enough of you play along, then I can actually start designing something a little bit more elaborate for the next season. I'll give you a clue as to which video you need to look for at the end of this guide, so stay tuned. Who built the rope bridge? The group encounters and crosses a rope bridge on their trek, which ultimately collapses after Hurley and Charlie cross it. The origin of the bridge is never explained in the episode or anywhere else, and there are no explicit clues as to who built it. It's effectively there to function as a classic adventure set piece a la Indiana Jones. However, a few possibilities exist within the lore of the show. We know the Dharma Initiative built various infrastructure elements across the island, and though most of their facilities are more industrial in nature, it is plausible that they built the bridge to access hard-to-reach areas, especially during their early exploration of the island's terrain. The others were mostly nomadic during their time on the island and weren't into building much. Most of the structures they inhabit were built by other cultures and societies, but it's possible that they could have created temporary crossings too. We also can't rule out the US military who occupied the island during the 1950s and brought Jughead to its shores. However, the most likely culprits in my opinion are inhabitants that predate both the others and Dharma, and any military occupation. The island has a long layered history of previous civilizations that lived there, including the Romans. It's absolutely possible that this bridge was actually built by the Man in Black's people as they explored the island in search of those pockets of electromagnetism. Let me know in the comments what your theories are on this one. Why was Hurley in a mental institute? Hurley was at Santa Rosa because he suffered a psychological breakdown after a tragic accident in which a deck he was standing on collapsed, killing 23 people. Although Hurley wasn't physically hurt, he blamed himself for the accident, believing it was caused by his weight, which is a belief that's fueled by deep-seated guilt and low self-worth, all of which can be traced back to his absent father figure David Reyes, who abandoned the family when Hugo was just a kid, leaving him with nothing but a candy bar as a parting gift. The trauma from the deck collapse triggered a catatonic state and dissociation in Hurley, thereby leading him to being institutionalised. While at Santa Rosa, Hurley developed coping mechanisms, including inventing an imaginary friend named Dave, who represented his self-destructive tendencies and whom shared the name of his own father. And it's also during his time there that he first heard the numbers being repeated obsessively by a fellow patient who had once been stationed at a listening post with the US Navy. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42 has become such an iconic sequence within the fandom and as a representation of the show's influence on pop culture. You'll see them pop up in other shows as little Easter eggs, with other creators paying tribute to the show that made Easter egg hunting in ARGs part of the TV viewing experience. But the numbers themselves are not just a quirky narrative device, they become a central thread woven into the show's fabric, from Russo's maps and papers, to the code that must be entered into the Swan Hatch, to Jacob's candidate list, and even the climactic events of the final season. These digits take on an almost mythic significance. The numbers are what really supercharged fan theories. They created a forensic fandom overnight. Unlike many mysteries on the show, this one arrived as data, and we retroactively started canvassing back through episodes to find more instances of their appearances or mentions. Oh my god, they're everywhere. What else could we have missed? What else is being hid right in front of our eyes? It legitimately changed how we watched episodes of Lost after this. The Lost experience and the Valenzetti equation backstory only helped to increase the obsession. Loyal viewers began logging every numeric appearance with near-academic rigour, and the foundations of reference guides such as Lostpedia slowly started to get built. So much data, so much speculation. What a time it was to be alive. This obsession that everybody was sharing started to bleed through to the real world too. For instance, there were fans who played the lottery using this sequence, and in some cases even winning, and this all helped to reaffirm the reach of the series in the collective cultural imagination. Unfortunately, this also led to a payoff problem. You see, if the digits were this meaningful in Season 1 and generated this much intrigue and excitement and forensic analysis, then the final explanation had to be pretty monumental. I don't think the writers realised how powerful and perilous codified mysteries could actually be. Every recurrence of the numbers in the show created what can best be described as an expectation debt. The writer of this episode, David Fury, who was the man responsible for some of the best episodes of Year 1 and sadly left the show before Year 2, a major loss in my opinion, talked with the Hatch podcast and explained where he got the numbers from.
For me, it was just writing the numbers in this episode. Okay, there's these lottery numbers that Hurley heard from a guy who was in an institution who heard those numbers being broadcast. That's all I knew, and that's all of us knew. We didn't really know what it meant yet. So the numbers I chose were first number was 4, which was the years that Locke was in a wheelchair. So I took that number 4, and then it was, I think, 815, which isn't it Flight 815, Oceanic
Yep.
Flight 815?
Yep.
So it was 8 and then 15, and then it was in Tabula Rasa. The reward for Kate's capture was 23,000 Australian dollars. It was a weird amount. It was something I just remembered in Tabula Rasa that there was a weird amount for her reward that I think was 23,000. Anyway, they're all related to an episode, and everybody can look through all the episodes to figure out which are which. With the only exception being the last number being 42, which was a Hitchhiker's reference.
Fury is referring to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy there, and how in that book, the number 42 is revealed to be the answer to life, the universe, and everything. During the development of Year 1, there was a lot being figured out behind the scenes, and a lot of debate and conflict with the network in terms of what the long-term solutions to some of these mysteries was actually going to be. So the numbers were introduced without a full understanding of where that mystery was going to go, but I think the concept ended up speaking for itself, despite the lack of a direct in-show explanation. Hurley's guilt complex about feeling responsible for the crash of the plane because of his cosmically bad luck plays well into what we would find out later about him. He frequently revolves around feelings of guilt and shame, not just as they relate to food and his eating disorder, but also to another accident he believed he caused with the deck collapse, and he allowed himself to absorb all of the blame for that. And now here he is once again blaming himself for the crash of this plane.
I think the plane crash might have been my fault.
Don't be daft. How could you possibly...
Hey, before we came here, a lot of bad stuff used to happen whenever I was around.
Charlie rightly dismisses it as self-pitying, egocentric nonsense. The world doesn't revolve around any one man. It actually revolves around 2. And even though Hurley is an incredibly important person whom the island very much needs, the numbers themselves are not cursed. And because Hurley had not yet been touched by Jacob, it was the island itself that brought him via a series of course corrections that would drive him towards Flight 815. Every seemingly weird incident was about adjusting this man's trajectory bit by bit. As for the curse, I think it's all about mindset. For most people, our perception of reality, whatever it may be, is our reality, even if it's not an objective one. The difference with Hurley is that he has an untapped reservoir of power. This power was probably always within him, but it took his time on the island and proximity to the source to really open it all up. Before then, he might have just been influencing his own environment without even realising it, just like Walt was drawing things towards himself and making strange events happen around him without consciously intending them. Hurley believed he was cursed, and therefore started manifesting that curse wherever he went. This is all about the law of attraction. What is the law of attraction, some of you may ask? Well, according to Google, the law of attraction is a philosophy suggesting that your thoughts and beliefs, particularly positive ones, attract positive experiences into your life, while negative thoughts and beliefs attract negative outcomes. The idea is essentially that like attracts like, and what you focus on will manifest in your reality. I believe that Hurley's experiences are based upon a supernatural version of this concept. Jacob, the man with centuries worth of experience with the island's mysterious ways, later talks to Hurley about this very thing.
That's why the plane crashed. My friends died. Libby, Charlie. And now they visit me. And I can't make it stop.
What if you weren't cursed? What if you were blessed?
So Jacob is telling Hurley that he's actually blessed. And I believe that the writers are talking to us via Jacob. Everything that has happened to Hurley has been part of something bigger than simply one man's luck. There will always be darkness, whether it be the evil that people do to one another, or personal tragedy and suffering, or global chaos that is beyond any one individual's control. But there is also light, the love that people share with one another, the triumph and victories of life that bring us hope and joy, and the collective bonds of our humanity that link us all together. It's all about how you look at it. If you only see the darkness, then darkness is all you will ever know. So Hurley was never cursed in my opinion, and by the time he's driving that Dharma van down the hill in season 3 with his best friend riding shotgun alongside him, both men feeling doomed by fate together, the elation that the rev of that engine brings to them as they take back control of their lives is the moment that Hurley finally puts the idea of being cursed to rest. Quite appropriately, our number count finally gets to tick off all 6 numbers of the sequence in this episode. We get to see them all together in one place, twice no less. First on Hurley's winning lottery ticket at the start, then on the housing of the hatch itself at the end. A lot of fans never noticed that Mary Jo, the woman drawing the winning numbers, is the same woman who was with Sawyer at the start of Outlaws. This actually took me many watches to pick up on myself. It also turns out that the actress playing Mary Jo is Brittany Perrineau, the real-life wife of Harold Perrineau, while the news reporter who confirms that this is the 16th week without a winner is the voice of none other than co-showrunner Carlton Cuse.
That's right, Mary Jo, because this is the 16th week without a winner.
Other individual occurrences of the numbers include Martha Toomey lost her leg 16 years ago in a car accident. Sam Toomey killed himself 4 years ago before Hurley ever showed up on their doorstep. And let us not forget that Leonard is playing Connect 4. In the next episode guide, we are launching into the heavily serialised endgame arc of the season with Deus Ex Machina, which will include a deeper analysis of Locke's nightmare, his mission to find the Beechcraft, and just what exactly the purpose of Boone's doomed fate was in service of. Hold on to your butts. Your clue as to which episode guide contains the link to the secret video is this. The episode guide in question, quite appropriately, is one of the numbers. Happy hunting. If you enjoyed this, then please help the channel by checking out the other videos in this episode guide. The more views they get, the more chances I have of keeping this guide going. Thanks for watching. See you back on the island.